So I've actually got two stories that I think are worth hearing, and they're both related to each other. My name is David. I used to work late nights at a gas station / convenience store out in the middle of nowhere. This was forever ago, which I'm only mentioning because it was back before every establishment had state-of-the-art security systems and cameras covering every square inch of their property. It's not like security systems didn't exist, more so that it wasn't much of a priority. Plus, the owner was cheap. But anyway, I didn't care because the job was laughably easy. The most difficult part of working there was honestly the owner. He legitimately had the mind of a goldfish. We'd have the same two arguments multiple times a week, and it was almost like this guy forgot what we argued about every time because he'd constantly repeat himself and bring up things we'd already addressed. But whatever. Here's everything you need to know. Most nights it was just me in there from 11 p.m. to 7 in the morning, and the place didn't see much traffic. That's about it. Anyway, one night, I'm pretty sure it was during the week, I was doing what I always did, leaning against the counter with a magazine in hand, trying to prevent the boredom from putting me to sleep. It was really late. I don't remember exactly what time it was, since the store had the remarkable ability to blend all the ungodly hours of the night into one lump of misery. But the store was dead silent. You know that faint buzzing noise those old fluorescent lights make? That was the only noise I'd hear in hours, and my brain had gotten numb to it, which I guess explains why I was so startled when the front door chimed. I looked up, and there was a man walking in. He was this tall, 30-something looking black guy with an above-average build. My first thought was ex-pro athlete, but then I looked at him a little more closely. Here's the thing, and I can't overstate how jarring this was. He was quite literally covered in blood, or I guess it could have been red paint, but I knew it wasn't. It was everywhere. There was a huge splatter across his chest for one, not to mention the streaks on his face and arms. It was a cartoonish amount of blood, which is why my brain took so long to process it. It was one of those unique sights that paralyzes your brain for a few moments because it doesn't fit any familiar category of lived experience. But what really got me were his eyes. They were just empty. I don't know how else to describe them. There was nothing behind them. It legit looked like he was just walking into the gas station at 2 a.m. on any other night. He looked perfectly normal, like he was relaxed and almost bored. It was like he didn't even know he was drenched in what was very clearly blood. I'm describing all of this in vivid detail so that my reaction makes sense. I don't want to come across as some pathetic loser. It was genuinely a terrifying situation. I was completely frozen, and all I could do was stare at the guy, which was probably the last thing I wanted to be doing. I couldn't help myself. Every time I was able to look away, my gaze immediately snapped right back to his eyes. He noticed, obviously, which wasn't too surprising. I mean, I was quite literally staring at him. I'm not sure what I was expecting him to do, but I definitely was not expecting him to smile at me. And then he said, calm as anything, "Don't worry, it's not my blood." As if that was supposed to make me feel any better. It didn't. My brain immediately started the emergency alarms, that this guy is a murderer. He might have just killed someone. He might kill me. Those were the only thoughts running through my brain, and I was freaking the fuck out. But then my survival instincts kicked in, and I started acting like everything was normal. I nodded at him like he had said something normal about the weather, and I buried my head back in the magazine. I watched him walk through the aisles like nothing was wrong. He grabbed some random stuff and came up to pay. I was actually kind of surprised that he wasn't going to just steal the items. I probably would have let him. I rang him up, careful not to look him in the eyes. The nightmare was almost over. He paid in cash, didn't say anything else, and left. The door chimed and he was gone, as simply as that. The second I heard a car engine start somewhere out in the parking lot, I grabbed the phone and called 911. I told them what I saw, and I tried to describe the guy as accurately as possible. I told them I didn't really know what had happened, but I was positive that something happened. The dispatcher was asking some clarifying questions when everything went sideways. I was mid-sentence when the door chimed again. Great, another customer. That was the last thing I wanted to deal with, but I was wrong. It wasn't another customer. It was him again, the guy I was in the middle of reporting to the police. He looked absolutely furious. I hung up the phone as fast as I could, but it was too late. He knew what I was doing. He must have seen me through the window. He stormed up to the counter and started demanding to know if I'd called the cops. I denied it, but he wasn't buying it. Not even a little. Things escalated quickly. He started cursing at me, telling me to mind my business and that he knew I was lying. I just put my hands up and didn't say anything, trying to defuse things as best I could, but there was nothing I could do. His voice was getting louder, and those empty eyes were suddenly filled with rage. At first, I thought he was just going to yell at me, but I saw it a second too late. He jumped across the counter and attacked me before I could do anything. I don't mean he climbed over it. I mean he launched himself across the counter and tackled me to the ground before I could even react. In all of 2 seconds, he went from screaming at me to strangling me, and I was fighting for my life. I thought I was going to die. I had never been in a physical altercation before that night, and I was certain this guy was trying to end my life. I thrashed around wildly, kicking, scratching, biting even. I was just trying to survive. I could feel his blood, or whoever's blood it was, all over me, smearing my clothes and face. We were still rolling around on the floor when I resorted to my final option. I screamed that I had a gun, and I wasn't afraid to use it. A complete bluff, of course. Something about the way I said it must have been convincing, though, because he stopped punching me. He scrambled off and bolted for the door. I was still on the ground in a painful haze when I heard his car speed out of the parking lot. I didn't even get up at first. I just laid there for a while, covered in a mix of someone else's and my blood. The police showed up maybe 10 minutes later. When they saw the state I was in, they immediately left and tried to track the guy down. I never heard from them again. There was nothing about it on the news either, so I was completely in the dark. The experience was by far the scariest physical thing that has ever happened to me. Okay, if you thought that was crazy, I promise you this one's worse. A few months after the first incident, I was still working at the same gas station, which was probably my first mistake considering what happened. But I needed the money. Also, there was a part of me that had convinced myself it was just a freak occurrence. A one-time thing that had no chance of ever happening again. But that's not the case. It was another late night when the next thing happened. Looking back, the circumstances surrounding the night were pretty much identical to that of the first incident. It was a late night, I was alone in the store, dying of boredom, etc. So anyway, this guy walks in the store and immediately catches my eye. The first strange thing I noticed was that he was wearing a suit, and not just any suit. This thing looked expensive. It was dark gray and perfectly tailored. He had no business being anywhere near a gas station past midnight dressed like that. My first thought was that he must be coming from a wedding, or maybe some kind of corporate event. I mean, there had to be some kind of explanation for what he was doing. But even important people don't walk into gas stations in the middle of nowhere wearing nice suits. That just doesn't really happen, and I would know. The guy didn't browse or even so much as glance at the aisles. He clearly wasn't hiding his intentions, or just didn't care enough to. Instead, he walked right up to me. He didn't speak or even look at me. He just reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph. At first, I was beyond confused, but then I looked down at the picture, and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was a picture of that guy who had come into the store with blood all over himself and tried to kill me. The photo wasn't 100% clear, but I was sure it was unmistakably the same person. I tried to mask my surprise, but I don't think I did a good job. I kept my face glued to the photo, but I could feel that man watching me. He didn't say anything at first, and when I looked up to meet his gaze, he just stared at me, like he was studying my face or reading my mind. I wasn't sure if he was expecting me to say something, so I didn't. It was painfully awkward, and then, after a really uncomfortably long pause, he finally spoke. His voice was surprisingly gruff, almost like he had just smoked a full pack of cigarettes. He asked me if I had ever seen that man before, and I immediately said I hadn't. It felt like the right answer, even if I couldn't explain it at the time. I just didn't want to get involved in any kind of illicit activity that was going on, and my gut was screaming, "Deny, deny, deny." The guy didn't respond. He just kept staring at me with these cold, calculating eyes that I couldn't read. It was really unnerving, especially given what he was asking me about. The silence was excruciating, and with every passing second, I lost confidence in the believability of my lie. Still though, I wasn't budging, and I was still pretty sure I had given a convincing answer. I won our little implicit standoff, and the guy finally reached down and picked up the photograph. As soon as he turned his back, I let out a huge sigh of relief, thinking everything was over. I watched him walk through the store toward the door, but right before he opened it, he stopped, and he turned back around to face me one more time, and then he just said, "I know you're lying." And then, before I could even respond, he was gone. I was pretty shocked by the whole encounter, more than I wanted to admit to myself. Being in that store all alone didn't feel safe anymore, and I didn't really know what to think. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out what the hell had just happened. Who was that guy? How did he know about the first incident? I wondered if he was a cop or a detective, or if he was something else entirely, someone connected to whatever that blood-covered man had been involved in. That's the thought that really freaked me out. I pretty quickly reasoned that if he had been someone official like a cop, he would have revealed his identity to me, which could only signify bad news. I didn't end up calling the police that time, partly because I wasn't sure what I'd even say, and partly because of the PTSD over what happened the last time I called the police. Nothing happened for a while after that night, though. I was a little shaken, yeah, and part of me was expecting something else to happen that night, but nothing did. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I started thinking something might have actually been wrong. I started noticing the same silver SUV in various spots throughout my day. At first, it was parked across the street from the gas station during my daytime shifts, which was normal enough, but then I noticed it in the parking lot of the grocery store I went to, which was a touch stranger. Once I saw it on my street, the alarm bells started to go off again. I'm not a paranoid person by nature, but when you see the same vehicle in several different locations over the course of 2 weeks, you start to wonder. I had a feeling I knew who it was, and I told myself the next time I saw the car, I would call the police and report it as discreetly as possible. I knew it was that guy who had walked into the store that night in a suit. It had to be him. The worst part about it all was not knowing how he'd figured out where I lived. Somehow he tracked me down. You have to remember, I lived alone at the time. It's not like I had protection at home or a lot of people to consult on this. I don't know why, but I convinced myself things would blow over if I just ignored it. And of course, that was an awful way to proceed. About 3 weeks after he'd first shown up, I was jerked awake in the middle of the night by the sound of glass shattering. My first reaction wasn't to freeze or flee, but to fight. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed and ran into the living room. There was no one there, which I was able to determine in just a few minutes because the house was pretty small. There was something, though. There, sitting in the middle of the living room floor, surrounded by broken glass, was a rock. Just a plain rock, maybe the size of a fist. There was no note attached to it, but I understood what it meant. In that moment, I realized I couldn't do this anymore. That guy had clearly been stalking me, and he was clearly involved in something awful and was trying to tell me something. I didn't know what that thing was, but I knew I wanted no part of it, so I caved. I quit my job the next day and started looking for other places to live. It took me a little over a month to find a nondescript apartment a few towns over, and I figured that was good enough. In that moment, I didn't see the SUV one time, but my mind was made up, and nothing happened after that. I was finally at peace, and I was actually able to find another job relatively easily. I ended up moving again not even a year later, this time way out of state, and that was that. But I still think about both experiences from time to time. Even though the first encounter was probably more life-threatening, it's the second one that gets me. I was never able to figure out why someone would go through all that trouble, stalking, harassment, intimidation, just because I'd called the cops on someone covered in blood. The only explanation I could think of was that he somehow thought I had a connection to that first guy, and I was harboring him or sheltering him or something. It's been years, and I've accepted that I'll probably never figure out the truth behind any of what happened. This happened about 8 months ago. The night in question, I was heading back from a job site about 3 hours from my house. I was beat. The job had taken longer than expected, and I didn't have the amount of caffeine in my system such exhausting work required. By the time I got back on the road, it was already past 10. I know a 3-hour drive doesn't sound too intense, but I had been working so hard that even the simple task of keeping my eyes open was a chore. Plus, my truck is several years old. I don't drive a fancy vehicle with assisted driving or anything like that, so it's not like I had the comfort of knowing my car would help with the drive. About 45 minutes in, I knew I needed to stop. My eyelids were doing that thing where they just kind of drift down on their own, and I was having to physically shake my head to stay alert. So I pulled into the next gas station off the highway. It was around 11 at that point. I filled up my tank, smoked a cigarette, and kind of stood there debating what to do. I still had over 2 hours of driving ahead of me, and I knew there was no way I'd make it. So I made the decision to take a quick nap and finish the drive afterward. I drove to the corner of the parking lot and turned my engine off. I was just going to go to sleep for a few hours right there. I've slept in worse places, it didn't seem like a big deal. I was out almost instantly. When my alarm went off, it felt like I had blinked and an hour had passed. I still wasn't fully rested, but I was definitely more alert than before, which was good enough for me. The lot was completely empty now. There had been at least 2 other cars there when I pulled in, and they were both gone. Without as much as a second thought, I started my truck and pulled back onto the highway. Things were fine for maybe the first 20 minutes. The highway was dead, and I was kind of zoning out. Not falling asleep per se, but just letting muscle memory take over. I was essentially on autopilot. At one point, I realized my truck was making some strange noises. It actually took my brain a few minutes to process what I was hearing as abnormal. That's how zoned out I was. I turned the AC down so I could hear things more clearly. There was this faint thumping sound coming from somewhere behind me. I turned around a few times, but didn't see any loose items bouncing around in the back seat or anything like that. I figured it was just something shifting around in the truck bed. One of my tools, maybe. Beyond speculating, there wasn't much else I could do. The situation didn't really warrant me pulling over, so I made a mental note to check it when I got back home, and I kept driving. The sounds continued, though. It actually started to bother me, and I ended up cranking the radio to drown it out. At one point, I slammed my hand against the hood of the truck and cursed out of frustration. Strangely, that seemed to work. For maybe 10 minutes after that, things were quiet. I was relieved, not because the noise was worrying me, but because it was genuinely ticking me off. The adrenaline from getting so worked up had woken me up a bit more, which was a good thing. But that increased alertness also cleared some of the brain fog, and I started thinking about how odd it was for a sound being made by an inanimate object to stop so abruptly as a result of my outburst. I had already eliminated the possibility that a faulty part in my truck had been making the sound, so the fact that slapping the hood could have caused it to stop was such a weird coincidence. I was in my head about it, debating whether I should stop or not, when out of nowhere, I heard a deafening crack come from directly behind me. It was not a normal sound, and it definitely wasn't a normal crack either. It was more like a crash, like someone had thrown a rock against one of my windows. The next 30 seconds were pure chaos and terror. I turned around in shock, and what I saw nearly made me lose control of my vehicle. There was a person standing in my truck bed, banging on the glass divider between the truck bed and the back seat with one of my tools. It was dark, but I could clearly see him. He was banging on the glass repeatedly, like a wild animal trying to claw its way out of a cage. The way he was moving was truly barbaric. I can't overstate that enough. I swerved uncontrollably, partly out of fear and partly to try and shake him off. I lost control of the truck and started spinning out of control. I genuinely thought I was going to flip, but all I could think about was the maniac who was trying to smash his way through the glass. I somehow managed to wrestle the truck back under control, and I skidded to a halt halfway between the right lane and the shoulder. I was too disoriented and terrified to think about how lucky I had been to avoid a wreck, and the moment my head stopped spinning, I ripped off my seatbelt. I don't know what came over me. I'm not the bravest person, and I wasn't armed, but I knew I wanted to do something. I couldn't just sit there. I had to confront the psycho in the truck bed, if he was even still there. I threw the door open and ran around the truck. As I was approaching the truck bed, I saw a man in a hoodie climbing out. He jumped onto the ground and started running for the tree line off the side of the highway. I chased him for a few seconds before realizing that was a terrible decision. It was pitch black out there. I had no idea if he was armed, and we were completely alone. Wherever my bout of confidence had come from, it didn't last. In a matter of seconds, I was terrified all over again. I ran back to my truck and sped off without even looking back to see where that guy went. I drove for a little while and then pulled over again to inspect the damage to my truck. My brain was genuinely in shock. I couldn't think straight, and I started to feel what I can only describe as a panic attack. I calmed myself down and got out of the truck. The glass divider was destroyed. It wasn't completely shattered, but there were so many cracks in it that one more forceful impact would have taken it out. I climbed into the bed of my truck to see what he had been hitting the glass with, but something caught my attention before I could even figure it out. There was a foreign object in there that I didn't recognize. It definitely wasn't a tool. It took me a few seconds to realize what I was looking at. It was a trash bag. It was wrapped over on itself multiple times, like someone had been trying to keep it really secure. And it was small too, like the size of 2 fists. It looked wet, and as I crouched down to get a better look, I realized it smelled disgusting. It smelled rancid, like rotting meat or food. I didn't want to touch it, but I needed it out of my truck. I needed to be as far away from that bag as possible. So as gingerly as I could, I grabbed it and quickly chucked it toward the tree line. I didn't give things another thought. I immediately got back in the driver's seat and started driving away. As I was pulling out, I looked down at my hands and realized they were tinted slightly red. The bag had been coated in something red that was now all over my hands. It was sickening, but there was nothing I could do besides drive. I rubbed my hands on my jeans and tried to just make it home without going insane. I ended up keeping the incident to myself. I didn't involve the police, and it wasn't until weeks later that I even told my friends about what happened. I couldn't stop thinking about the encounter for days afterwards. I got a friend of mine to fix my glass a few days later without asking questions, and that was pretty much that. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't affected by what happened. Looking back, the only explanation that makes sense is that he climbed into the bed of my truck while I was asleep at the gas station, which makes sense because I don't have a bed cover. But he must have been lying completely flat there for most of the drive too, otherwise I would have seen him. I've never been in a life or death situation like that before. It was by far the most terrifying thing I've ever gone through. Years ago, I did the night shift at a gas station because I was strapped for cash and needed a second job. I worked the night shift there for a few months. It was around my 2nd or 3rd month that this guy started regularly coming in really late at night, always around 2 a.m. He was about 6 feet tall. He had long, stringy hair. He'd always come in, buy a tall boy, and leave. But after a while, he one night asked me my name. I told him my name, and he just kept saying, "Rob, I like that," as he'd laugh to himself. He cracked open the tall boy he just bought and walked out of the store talking to himself. He was clearly hammered. This was the night I was curious to see if he had been drinking and driving every single time that he'd come to the store. I watched as he left, and he walked out of sight off the gas station property. That would make sense. He never once bought gas anytime he came in. He'd always just buy alcohol. I'd seen him just about every night after that for a while. He'd come in, some nights noticeably drunker than others, and sometimes he'd just lean on one of the shelves for a while and not say anything. He'd always greet me with a "Hey Rob" anytime he'd come in. One night he was just leaning on a shelf, drinking the tall boy he just bought, not saying anything, just staring at a wall. I asked him for his name finally. He looked at me, took about 5 seconds, and said, "Bob." Now, I always felt like Bob is a go-to fake name when you're lying about your name. I wondered if the first thing that came to mind for him was Bob because it rhymes with my name, but I went with it. I said, "So Bob, where do you work?" He laughed so loud it actually startled me. He said he doesn't work. He said the government completely fucked him out of his job. I got the vibe he was wasted again. He looked at me with an angry-looking face, but interestingly said, "I like you, Rob. You seem like you know what you're doing." I didn't know what that meant, but he walked out of the store right after that. I didn't see him again for a while. I'd say over a week passed, which for a regular like him was a while. Bob always gave me this off, mildly creepy vibe. I figured he was usually drunk, but something was obviously wrong in his personal life. Well, one very stormy night, with less customers than usual, likely because of the storm, I heard the ding of the front door as someone entered, and I swear before looking I imagined it to be Bob, and when I looked, I was shocked to see it was actually him. But it was a much scarier version of Bob. He was completely soaked. He wasn't wearing a rain jacket or using an umbrella. He was just in a dark shirt and jeans. His long hair was drenched, and he was just standing by the door looking straight ahead at the wall. He looked like he was angry, and yet his mind was elsewhere, like his thoughts were running. The way he was standing there blankly, staring at nothing, completely soaked, it was freaking me out. I said, "Bob, are you okay?" He didn't turn his head or move. He stood still and said, "I did something really bad." I asked, "What did you do?" He then looked at me, said, "I need somewhere to hide," then walked past me at the register towards the little restroom hallway. He disappeared behind the wall, and I heard one of the doors open and close. I was genuinely getting uncomfortable with Bob now. I didn't enjoy his presence whenever he was in the store, and tonight something was extra off about him. He seemed like a zombie, and that "I did something really bad" comment was incredibly creepy. Some time passed, and Bob never came out from the bathroom. I assumed he was wasted again, probably passed out or puking. Either way, I didn't want to intervene. And then, the next thing I remember, the lights to the place cut out, and the store was completely dark. I was standing in a pitch-dark gas station during a major storm with an unhinged drunk man. I used the flashlight from behind the counter to make my way towards the back of the store by the inventory storage and the panel board. The door to the back was in the same little hallway as the restrooms. As I walked by the two restroom doors, both of them were ajar, and Bob wasn't in either of them. I went through the door to the back. I was planning on going straight to the panel board, but I stopped when I heard a slight dripping in the room somewhere, and the squeaking of wet shoes. My heart sank into my stomach. I said, "Bob," in a very weak and scared voice. I heard squeaks right to my left. When I pointed my flashlight in that corner, there was Bob, with his eyes opened wide, and he lunged at me and started screaming, "I'm gonna fucking kill you." I pushed him off of me as he was clawing at my back. I ran back through the door to the front of the store. He didn't follow me. I grabbed my rain jacket and ran straight to my car. I sat in my car as I dialed 911 and spoke to an operator. I stayed on the line with her, and it didn't take long for a couple police officers to arrive and go inside with me. Bob was still hiding in the back room, huddled in a corner, apparently like some rabid creature. His pupils were huge, I only noticed it then. He was on something. They took him to the station after I told them that he lunged at me, threatened to kill me, and stated that he did something really bad earlier. I found out over a month later that this Bob guy's real name was Martin, and he had brutally beaten his ex-wife to death. It might have happened on that same night that he came into the gas station. Long story short, I never wanted to work another night shift at any job ever again after this night. I've done a lot of night driving in my life. Not for work or anything. My old friend group and I would always just stay out till crazy hours when we were in our late teens and early 20s. I guess you could say we were the losers. We thought staying out till 5 a.m. every weekend hanging at parks or in parking lots was cool. Looking back, it was a stupid waste of time. But basically for that reason, I've done my fair share of driving at off hours in the night. And usually that's when the drunkos and crazy people are on the roads. It was a weekend night. It had to be approaching 4 in the morning. I wanted to go home. I drove one of my friends home from the park we were hanging out at, and before driving myself home, I had to stop for gas. I used to like getting gas at night because there would be no other cars in the way. I pulled into one of my usual gas stations not far from my parents' house. As I was walking to the building to pay, there was a short guy wearing a hood walking past me. He stopped in his tracks and stared me down as I walked past. I said, "What?" as I kept walking. He said nothing, so I kept walking. Typical crackhead. I went inside the building to pay the attendant for my gas. I also bought a lottery ticket while I was there. I came back outside and started to fill up. I looked around, and as expected, it was a ghost town at this hour. Once done, I got back in the car and started driving home. Halfway home, I heard something behind me, in the car. I looked in the rearview mirror, and there was someone in the rear seat looking back at me. I let out a scream so loud I probably almost collapsed my lungs. I slammed on the brakes and screamed, "Get out." It was the dude from the gas station. I opened my doors and started screaming help, knowing at least a couple people would come out from their houses. Sure enough, a couple houses' porch lights turned on, and I saw some doors opening. The guy got out of my car and said, "I could have slit your throat." As some people came out of their houses, he started to run away down the street. I didn't chase after him. A couple people came over to me and asked if I was alright, and I told them how a stranger was in my back seat. By now, the guy was out of sight. I wasn't about to start driving around after a crackhead. I thanked the people who came out and continued my drive home, making sure I didn't see him anywhere the rest of the drive. That was the scariest experience of my life. This event happened in the mid-60s in the Atlanta area. At that time, I was about 8 or 9 years old. My father taught school in a suburb of Atlanta that was some distance from where our home was located. I went to the same school where he taught, so I rode with him every day. However, we had to get up very early each morning and head out before the sun was up. We always stopped several mornings each week to top off on gas at a small, independent station. We were often the first car there shortly after the station opened. In those days, everything was full service. There was a booth with an attendant who would come out and fill your tank, wash your windows, etc. He would always be carrying a wad of bills in his pocket and a device on his belt from which he counted out coins. Behind the pumps were tiny bathrooms. I would often use the bathroom on mornings that we stopped there, as it was a fairly long drive. One morning, we again arrived before dawn to find the station completely deserted. It was totally quiet other than the traffic sounds going by. There was no sign of an attendant, either in the booth or anywhere else around the station. My father blew the car horn once, then again a few more times, but there was no response. We discussed what might be the problem. My father first suggested that perhaps the attendant might be in the bathroom, but when he still did not appear, my father said that maybe the attendant had experienced car trouble and had not been able to make it to work on time. We continued to wait for several minutes. No other cars pulled in. I told my father I needed to use the bathroom and put my hand on the car door handle to get out, but he told me that we could not wait any longer and I could use the bathroom at the next station we came to. So we left, still wondering what happened. A day or two later, my father was reading the local newspaper when I heard a loud exclamation from him. He excitedly told my mother and I about a small article which stated that the body of a gas station attendant had been discovered with multiple stabs stuffed into the men's bathroom of the station. It was the station we always went to. The article said the motive appeared to be robbery, as all cash and coins were missing. Early in the morning, the total amount of money was probably not a lot. The article gave no hint as to what amount was taken, but either way, that didn't stop the killer. I've often wondered how I would have been affected at that young age if I had insisted on going to the bathroom at that station and had opened the door to discover the body of the murdered attendant. We never went to that gas station again. This took place when I was 25. I was driving from North to South Texas, and due to my work schedule, I could only do this late at night. I was on Route 281 for much of the drive, and at these late hours, it was an easy, straight drive. I just had to keep myself awake. I was already kind of shot from work, and then getting on the road right after was brutal. I had to keep making stops for coffee at random gas stations just to keep myself going. I think it was my third time starting to feel a little sleepy, and on top of that, I needed to fill up my tank as well. I pulled into the first gas station I could find on the desolate side roads. I can't remember what kind of gas station it was, maybe a Sunoco or Shell. There was one other car in the parking lot. I parked next to one of the pumps and went inside. There were two people in the shop, the cashier, and then I noticed another guy pacing down the aisles. I went to the coffee maker and poured myself a cup. The guy who was pacing around came up to me and said, "Careful, it's hot," and then he laughed. It was a piss-poor, creepy, unnecessary attempt at starting a conversation that I didn't bite at. I was not in the mood. I didn't reply, and I took the coffee to the cashier where I paid for it as well as for the gas. The guy came up behind me while I was paying and said, "I really like that top." I said thank you just loud enough for him to hear. He followed it up with, "Where are you heading off to so late at night?" I was so annoyed by this point, I firmly asked him to leave me alone. The cashier was some 40-something-year-old Hispanic man. I wasn't sure how much English he understood, or if he was even reading the situation that was happening in front of him, but he was also a smaller, shorter man, and it was doubtful he was going to step in at all. The man behind me said calm down after I asked him to leave me alone. I left the shop without saying another word and went to my car. I heard the door open again a few seconds after I left the shop. I was next to my car now, preparing to fill up the tank. As gas started pumping into my car, I heard his footsteps on the concrete over on the other side of the pumps. Then they stopped. When the footsteps stopped, I glanced over, and I noticed him, creepily standing on the other side of the pump I was using. He was quite literally just standing there watching me. He wasn't filling up gas. There wasn't even a car there. I started considering grabbing my pepper spray from my center console. The guy said, "Are you alone?" When he asked that, the gravity of the situation escalated greatly. I replied, "No, my boyfriend is in the car." I opened the door and quickly grabbed the pepper spray from the center console. I grabbed it and held it at my side, pretending to still be focused on pumping the gas. The man was inching his way around the gas pump, like he was coming around to my side. He said, "I don't see anyone in the car." I pulled out the pepper spray and aimed it up at the man, and he laughed and backed away. He said he was just trying to make conversation. He was walking backwards with his focus locked onto me still. I was just about done pumping gas. Then I felt and heard a clank. The gas stopped pumping. My tank was full. I had like $6 worth of change. I had to go back inside to get it. The man was in between the shop and I. I had to make a choice. I made the decision to get my change. I had my arm up in the air still, pointing the pepper spray can at him. He continued to back away, chuckling. When it was safe, I turned my back to him and entered the shop and asked the cashier for change. I told the cashier that that man was making me really uncomfortable, but it seemed like he didn't really understand what I was saying. Once I got my change, I looked out the glass door into the parking lot before leaving. I didn't see that man out there. I was scared to go out there. Like, what if you were hiding somewhere? I stepped outside in front of the shop. I didn't leave that little sidewalk. I just stayed there, looking around. That man was gone, out of sight, which meant he was absolutely hiding. Eventually, a pickup truck pulled into the parking lot and pulled next to one of the pumps. A large man with a beard stepped out, and I went over to him asking him for help. I asked him to check if there was a man hiding behind my car. He was confused, but he did it for me. He got to the other side of my car, and he yelled, "What are you doing?" And there went that creepy man, hurrying away from behind my car. He started to run away into the darkness surrounding the gas station. I thanked that man so much, and he said in his thick southern accent to be careful out there. I left that parking lot in a hurry, and I continued the rest of my drive. That creepy man was 100% waiting to pounce as soon as I unlocked my car doors, and that's really disturbing to me.